So, today we're going to learn about the road to World War I. Upon completion of this lesson, you will be able to, number one, list and describe the reasons that World War I occurred. Two, explain the crisis in the Balkans. And three, list and describe the major provisions of the Treaty of Versailles. So, the road to World War I. We've talked a lot about this thing called nationalism. Nationalism we defined as a militant pride in one's nation. Remember, nation is a group of people. It is not a country. It is not a country. A nation is a group of people. So, people of European descent in the United States of America would be considered a nation. African Americans would be considered a nation. A state is the same thing as a country. So the United States of America is a state. So remember that Napoleon brought nationalism to Europe from France. Nationalism is going to be a big problem in Europe because Europe is composed of lots of multi-ethnic empires, so empires that are composed of multiple nations. So a lot of empires want to break up because the nations that reside in that empire want their own states. They want nation states. We've talked about this in the last unit. So the first thing that's going to lead to World War I is the rise of nationalism. The second thing is going to be imperialism. In the last unit, we talked about how European countries, as a result of a lot of different technologies, were finally able to conquer all of Africa and Asia. So European countries are competing for space in Africa, as well as India, as well as China, as well as the rest of Asia. So as they're competing there, that is going to heighten tensions in Europe. Militarism. Remember that the reason why European countries were able to conquer 86% of the world by the early 1900s is because they spent lots and lots and lots of money on warfare. This, again, is going to heighten tensions. And finally, alliances. So Kaiser Wilhelm II, he is the king of Germany at this point, is going to create an alliance with both Austria-Hungary and Italy. In response, Russia, France, and Great Britain all allied together prior to World War I. This alliance system is going to have huge impacts. So the needle that broke the camel's back, which finally led to World War I, is going to be the crisis in the Balkans. So one nation, remember that's a group of people called the Slavs, wanted to create one Slavic state in the Balkans. So the Balkans is the area between Greece and Italy. If we look over on our map on the right, we can see Italy, we can see the boot, we can see the Mediterranean, we can see Greece. All of that stuff above Greece is known as the Balkans. Now, Austria-Hungary is going to fight this idea of a Slavic state in the Balkans. The reason why they're fighting that state is because, again, look at the map. The map shows us Slavic groups in Europe before World War I, so 1914. We can see that everything with an orange line over it is where Slavic people live. We can see that about half of Austria-Hungary is populated by Slavs. So they do not want a Slavic state because they're afraid they'll lose territory over it. In fact, not only are they going to fight this idea of a Slavic state, they're even going to conquer more Slavic land. So they conquer Bosnia and Herzegovina in the early 1900s. Now, conquering Bosnia and Herzegovina makes Russia and Serbia, two Slavic countries that are right next to Austria-Hungary, very, very angry. On June 28, 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, a guy by the name of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is taking a victory lap. He's being rode around in his car in Bosnia to celebrate Austro-Hungarian domination of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And he is shot by a Slav nationalist, one of these guys who wants a Slavic state. This makes Austria-Hungary very, very, very angry. Remember, this is a monarchy. The guy next in line is really important, and he was just assassinated. So in response, Austria-Hungary is going to declare war on Serbia, one of those Slavic states that has been giving them a hard time. This angers Russia. Russia, seeing itself as a fellow Slavic state, is going to then declare war on Austria-Hungary. This starts a very, very complicated chain of events that pretty much leads the entire world into the First World War. So Russia assumes that Germany, an ally of Austria-Hungary, is going to go to war with Russia. So Russia sends soldiers to the German-Russian border. We look over on the map on the right, we can see that the German-Russian border is fairly large at this point in history. Now, Germany is afraid of a Russian invasion, so they declare war on Russia. Knowing that France and Russia are allies, Germany also declares war on France. This makes Great Britain angry. So in response, Great Britain declares war on Germany. So one little thing that happened in one little spot in the entire continent of Europe leads to the entire continent broiled into a war. Not only is the continent at war, the entire world is at war, because remember that most of the world at this point has been colonized by European countries. So, we're going to look at the Western Front for just a second. By 1914, the war is locked into a stalemate on the Western Front. So the Western Front is the front. It's where the war is taking place between Germany and France. Now, Germany is surrounded by Russia and France, and it fails to defeat either one by 1914, which means it's going to have to divide its forces onto two different fronts on opposite sides of the country. This is a very difficult situation Germany has found itself in. Thankfully, in France, war has devolved into what is known as trench warfare. We can see an example of trench warfare on the right. Basically, we have people living in ditches. You've got one ditch, then you've got, in front of that ditch, you have what is called no man's land, which is basically the land between the trenches. And on the other side of no man's land is the enemy ditch. And soldiers are going to stand in their trenches, and they're going to shoot each other. And it's very, very miserable. They get rained on. There's all sorts of diseases going through the trenches. It's not a fun place to live. In order to get across no man's land, you have to come out of your trench and run across no man's land into the enemy trench. Problem is that the Germans have machine guns set up in their trench, and when you're running across no man's land, it's very likely that you get mowed down. So World War I, especially on the Western Front, is not a very nice place, not a very, very fun place. Further complicating this are the many new technologies: airplanes, machine guns, tanks, artillery. We had come up with really advanced ways to kill each other. And this was on full display in World War I. Military strategists had all these new technologies, they had all these soldiers, and they didn't really know what to do. The Industrial Revolution had taken off, and they just didn't know what to do with all these different technologies. So World War I was really big bloodbath. You had military strategists trying new things with different technologies. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but it always ended up in dead soldiers. Eastern Front's a little bit different than the Western Front. So on the Eastern Front, we have Germany and Austria-Hungary fighting Russia. Now Russia, because again, Russia is a backwards country at this point in history, we've talked about that quite a bit, failed to industrialize as quickly as Germany and the rest of Europe had. So it quickly fell short on guns and munitions. The one thing Russia had going for it was that Russia has a huge population. If we go back and look at the map from a couple slides ago, look at Russia, so notice how big Russia is. Russia has a huge population. So even though every soldier may have not had a gun, they had lots and lots of soldiers. This is a great picture. Basically, now these aren't cannons. They look like cannons with the wooden wheels, but not nearly as advanced as their German counterparts. So we look at this map. This map kind of displays what the world looks like between 1914 and 1918, which is when World War I happened. We can see that most of the fighting, if we look at the European section, happens right there in Europe along the Western and Eastern fronts. If we look to the left in North America, we see the United States joins the war on the side of the Allies. That would be Great Britain and France in 1917. If we look over to where it says Southwest Asia in the purple, that's a fancy name for the Middle East. We can see that war is going to wage between the Ottoman Empire, which is still kicking around, and Arab nationalists. Again, we see nationalism playing a huge role in this war, even in the Middle East. We can see Africa. The image talks about how Africa was mostly European colonies and how these colonies are aiding their European owners. Notice India. We can see that India provides about 1.3 million soldiers to help the British out against the Germans. That's a big deal. Finally, if we look over at Japan, we see that Japan declares war on Germany in 1914. This is because Germany has colonies in China and the Pacific, and Japan wants to get big. It wants to gain some territories in Asia. So you may be thinking to yourself, why does the U.S. get involved? Well, the United States of America was selling lots and lots of guns and munitions and wonderful things that help us go to war to Great Britain and the French. Germans knew this. So the Germans send submarines out into the Atlantic Ocean to destroy American ships carrying weapons to the Allies. Eventually, this goes wrong for Germany, and one of their submarines sinks a British passenger ship known as the Lusitania. Now, Lusitania did have some guns and ammo on it, but it was mostly British and American citizens, specifically civilians. The American population gets very, very angry. Another 5 American ships are sank by Germany. So the Americans are just itching to go to war with Germany. They don't want to, but they're starting to get angry. Finally, what pushes the U.S. over the edge is what is called the Zimmerman Telegram. Basically, Germany sends a letter to Mexico and says, Mexico, if you side with us and you go to war with the United States before they enter the war, then once we win, we will give you back lands that the United States of America took from you in the Mexican-American War. Telegram gets leaked. The USA hears about it. They declare war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. World War I had a number of legacies. First, you've got lots of new technologies. Machine guns, tanks, airplanes, all kinds of things that made World War I very, very, very violent and would go on to influence the technologies of World War II. You had approximately 8.5 million dead soldiers as a result of World War I and some 21 million injured soldiers. So you're talking approximately 30 million either killed or wounded Europeans as a result of World War I. War cost about $338 billion, which is a lot of money even today, but adjusted for inflation is even more. League of Nations. So one of the big things that came out of World War I was all of the great powers came together and said, we should never do this again. That was terrible. That was devastating. That cost too much money. That cost too many lives. This is not okay. We need to have a way to come together and solve our problems. And that was the League of Nations. The idea was that countries, when they had problems, would meet and all of the countries would discuss it and make a decision about it. It does not work. It does not work, and we'll talk about that in a couple days. And finally, we've got the Treaty of Versailles. So the Treaty of Versailles is the peace agreement that was signed.
Mr. Englert, please call the front office.
It was an agreement that was signed by Germany and the winners of the war, which officially ended World War I. So the first thing that Treaty of Versailles entails was that Germany lost land, and Germany lost a lot of land. Number 2, it severely limits the size of the German military. It's going to limit the German military to about 100,000 soldiers, no air force, and very few tanks. It claimed that Germany was solely responsible for the war. And finally, it broke up the multi-ethnic empires of Europe, so Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and created nation states in their place. Answer the daily objectives.